Okay, so far I introduced the concept of anarchy. Anarchy means the absence of central government, and the state of anarchy means the state of war. But in reality, the anarchy does not mean that all the countries are not in the constant war because of the people find out how to manage the state of anarchy in international relations. But now, let me introduce some other concepts. If you believe the state of anarchy is a state of nature, you can be called realist. But there's another way of spectrum or ideology or prism through which you can see the world or analyze the world is idealism. If you don't believe state of anarchy, you are idealist. There are two fundamentally different concepts which you can analyze or see through in international relations. So let me introduce the concepts of realism and idealism now. Realism is a school of thought in international relations theory, and theoretically formalizing the realpolitik statesmanship. Realpolitik means the struggle for power. Struggle for power. So realists believe that the nature of international relations is a struggle for power. All the countries are struggling in order to maximize its own power or capability. And this realism rose in the early modern Europe, perhaps like 16th and 17th century. In other words, the realism is a belief that world politics ultimately is always and necessarily a field of conflict among actors pursuing power. All the countries are fighting against each other in order to pursue national power or domination. So Thomas Hobbes once said, "His struggle for power is the inhuman jungle." So stage life could be nasty, short, and brutish. And also about 2,000 years ago in Peloponnesian War, Thucydides also agreed that notion of the realpolitik. Also Machiavelli of Italy talked about a realism too. So if you believe that the state of international relations is a struggle for power, you can be classified as a realist. And in 20th centuries and so on, the realism developed into three. In other words, there are three kinds of realism. The first, classical realism. Classical realists believe that source of conflict follows from the human nature. It's a little interesting notion that our nation state is reflecting human basic instinct. It's a little awkward to hear that the first time. What is the human basic instinct? Human beings are naturally egoistic, try to maximize his or her power or interests over others. So the person tries to maximize his power and tries to dominate other people and control other people and exploit other people. That's the fundamental nature of human basic instinct. That human basic instinct was reflected to the nation state, country, state. So countries' basic policies are to expand its power and control other countries and dominate other countries or exploit other countries. It's a little weaker, awkward application of human basic instinct to the essence of nation state. Classical realists believe that all the source of national conflicts are from human nature. Second kind of realism is neorealism. Neorealism focuses upon the structure of anarchic state system. Source of conflicts are from the structure of the international society. There's a strong, big power pyramid in the international society, and all the countries are positioned within this pyramid. Currently, the powerful country in the world, the US, is located at the top of the pyramid, and second degree or third degree countries are positioned underneath it. At the bottom of the pyramid, the weak countries are located. So a country's behavior is strongly determined by where it is located. For example, in this power pyramid, most powerful country, which is the United States, and its allies, and third-tier countries, and the weak countries over here. And second-tier countries provide loyalty to the United States, and the US provides instead security and imports their merchandise from these countries. The same thing, third-tier countries provide loyalty to the second-tier countries and also the United States, and these countries and the US buy the merchandises and provide national security. So a country's position, where it is located, determines the country's position on international politics or diplomacy. So where you are depends on creates where you could do. If country stays here, a country's action or policy could be very limited. So if your country locates around here, probably your country's policy options are very much limited from the position where it is located. And also, realism could be divided into two: defensive realism and also offensive realism. I'm not going to explain these two concepts further in this slide. Now, idealism. So unlike realism, idealism maintains that a state should make its internal political philosophy the goal of its conduct and rhetoric in international affairs. In other words, states make domestic policies, and also that state's foreign policies should be made in the line with the domestic politics. For example, welfare policy of domestic society, and that country's foreign policy must be made in terms of welfare policies. If the government of country A helps their poor people, And country A's foreign policy must help the poor countries in the world. So domestic philosophy must be the same as the base of international affairs. Also, it believes that the relations among states are based upon the peace. I said, unlike realism. In terms of harmony of interest. Harmony of interest is a very important notion. Harmony of interest. So the fundamental essence of the interstate activities is peace and cooperation. Unlike the state of anarchy or state of war. And also harmony of interest. The term harmony of interest was made by the French philosopher Rousseau. Since according to Rousseau, human beings is a rational being. He has its own his interest, and also he has the general will that will transcend his own interest for the community. For example, now a person who has education provided by the government, and everybody has certain level of education, and he or she involves in economic activities. And also all of these people are rational beings. They make economic activities, and they all make money. And they can be rich, and the society can be rich, and the country as a whole could be rich. But sometimes his own interest has a conflict with the other people. In that case, what he or she should do. According to Rousseau, since the human being is a rational being, he has a special tendency he called the general will, with which he could transcend his own interest for the society. So harmony of interests are naturally visited, and the society has a peace, has equilibrium, and enjoys peace. That's the harmony of interest. American President Woodrow Wilson was an early advocate of idealism in his 14 points. And let me introduce some points advocated by the American President Wilson. The first was open diplomacy without secret treaties. Open diplomacy. Particularly, it is important in democracies because people has the right to know what their governments are doing. Open diplomacy, not secret diplomacy. Second, economic free trade. On the seas, during war and peace, free trade. During the peace or war, free trade. So he advocated free trade. Third, equal trade conditions in bilateral terms or multilateral terms. If we have any most favored nation status, MFN status with one country, that MFN status should be applied to other countries. That's the multilateralism. Equal trade conditions. Fourth, decrease armaments. In other words, disarmament. So countries should reduce their armament in order to maintain the peace and stability. And the fifth, adjust colonial claims. Because in the early 20th century, many powerful countries had colonies and all over the world. And they never listened the claims made by their colonies. But Wilson shouted that, please listen to your colonies and peoples in your colonies and adjust and adapt their claims. And the 14th, the creation of the League of Nations. In other words, the world government. It was his vision to maintain the peace and stability of the world, creating a world government, the League of Nations. But as you know, at the end of the Wilson's period, all the people got together and agreed to establish the League of Nations. But at the end of it, the US Congress did not ratify the League of Nations. That's why the US could not participate into the League of Nations. The result of it was also obvious. The League of Nations could not prevent the Second World War from being a reality. Let's go back to the idealism. Okay. So 14 points. So his idealism was a precursor to liberal international relations theory. The particular set of viewpoints arising amongst the institutional builders. He claimed the building institutions in order to secure the peace and cooperation among nations. Obviously, the organizations that came after the war were the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the United Nations, among others. So after World War I, the League of Nations. After World War II, the United Nations. So these two are the crystallization of the Wilsonian dream of world government. Again, realism does not believe in the world government, but idealism believes in a world government. So in summary, if we look at the realist view of society, in domestic society, we see the state of inequality and also disorder. So with the central government, these symptoms are mitigated sometimes. But in international society, we see the state of anarchy and also state of war. In contrast, realist view of society, in domestic society, state of equality and social order. In international society, we could find the peace and cooperation. So, which side you take in order to analyze international relations? Are you a realist or are you an idealist?